Okay, I think we're going to start. This is a so-called lively discussion, so I promise we won't bore you. We're going to move at a fast clip. So before we get started, I want everyone to notice the slide, because there's a QR code there, and especially if you're a librarian, we have like a really tiny survey with 4 questions. And if you are willing to access the QR code and fill out the questions, and we're going to leave that up for the whole session so you don't have to rush, you can take your time. I wanted to share briefly that I am Eileen Joy, and I'm the director of Punctum Books, which is an open access press in the humanities. And something I've been thinking about for a long time in the open access landscape is how much common cause librarians have with publishers, and how we should try to rethink the relationship so that it isn't about, as this conference emphasizes, vendors versus librarians. If we're going to think about how we can invest in more communitarian, equitable, and fair publishing practices with an emphasis on public knowledge, we shouldn't be doing it in our silos. We should be doing it together. So I've spent a lot of time the last couple of years talking to librarians about developing strategies for investing in community-led, nonprofit, open access publishing. And it strikes me that everybody needs help in this area. And it would be interesting to move to a place where we could gather resources and expertise to share with those who literally don't have the time, the money, et cetera, to do that on their own. To that end, we've brought together several librarians to talk to us on this topic, but also to speak to the larger picture of the library landscape. And those 3 people are, and these are in the order in which they will speak: Emily Drabinski, past president of the American Library Association, and also a digital pedagogy librarian at the City University of New York; Lydia Uziel, who is the Associate University Librarian for Research, Resources, and Scholarly Communications at University of California Library, Santa Barbara; and Jill Chirasella, who is the Scholarly Communications Librarian at the City University of New York. So without further ado, I give you Emily Drabinski, one of my personal heroes.
Thank you, Eileen, and thanks everyone for making the time to come and join this session. I've been asked to speak generally about the brokenness of American libraries, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that and some of the things that I saw over my year as president of the ALA that I think we need to keep in mind as we develop programs that invite us to work collaboratively in community, in conversation with one another, a demand that I think is more present than ever as I stand here in front of you. So just to give you a little bit of a shape of my thoughts here, I see someone looking puzzled at the screen. Are you good? Okay, all right. And I'm actually teaching in the library school at Queens College now, so I'm like looking for confused faces a little bit. So over my term as president, how many of you followed that experience? Okay, so I became president of the American Library Association as the first openly queer, openly left president that the association had had in its 146-year history. Not the first homosexual by any means. We know we are everywhere, and we've always been everywhere, but definitely the first one to be like very proud about that and very open about that. I came into that position in a moment of extraordinary public organizing from extremists on the right who are actively organizing to prevent books from being read. So I'm here at this conference as somebody who has spent the last year talking to library workers on the ground who are dealing not with sort of these high-level questions about open access book publishing, but are simply trying to survive on the day-to-day level, keeping their libraries open under this kind of assault. So it was an intense year, but I tried to go as many places as I could, because I think the same thing that drives open access publishing and drives any kind of collaborative project that succeeds, we have to keep talking to each other, which is what I find exciting about this conference, that we're all here talking to one another. Although, of course, I had some questions about the role of profit in that was shared at the opening session, but we can talk about that. I'm sure that'll come up in the conversation. So what I saw on the ground were a lot of libraries dealing not with questions of how and whether to invest in open publishing, but how do we keep the door open? How do we need new buckets to put under the new leaks in our roofs, and now are facing an immediate future that has, at the highest levels of government, people who are actively hostile to queer people, to Black people, to Indigenous people, to American history of the kind that is rooted right here in Charleston. And the struggles that we're all going to have to face as we fight to hold on to those things that we value are going to require all of us to be in it together, right? It's going to require a kind of collective power that we build, and that I think is, we're going to need to look for sites where that kind of collective energy can happen. And one of the things that's been inspiring to me in the last many years that I've been in the library field is the organizing that happens around open access. So even if I think it can be difficult to make a connection between the librarian in rural Idaho being followed home from work by people with guns who park out front of her house because she might give a kid a book to read. Like that's the reality for a whole lot of libraries in this country right now, right here in South Carolina specifically. That we have to link that struggle to the larger struggle of the open access movement, particularly community-led open access, which I believe is about a decommodification of knowledge, a decommodifying project when it's done by people who care about what we care about. So I'm interested in the ways that we might make those connections, because we're going to need each other in this moment. And I know are we not supposed to talk about politics? I've earned the right to talk about politics, but I think we know what I saw all across the country were right-wing extremists organizing incredibly effectively to win what they wanted, which is a closure of the commons, and we've got to be equally well organized. And there are tools and ways to do that, and I think the conversation that we're going to have here today about how power is built around community-led open access publishing, those are skills that I think are transferable, and we are going to find ourselves fighting a different set of battles in the coming years, although, maybe not, right? It's not as if we woke up in a different country, right? But I think we did wake up on Wednesday with an expectation that power is going to shift around a little bit. And we're going to have to lean in not just to our commitment to open access, but our commitment to each other and to our commitment to libraries, period, as institutions that are worth protecting, saving, and expanding. And I'm grateful to be part of the conversation today and looking forward to the questions.
Hello, everyone. So good to see you today. I'm really excited and happy to be part of these conversations around the open access book publishing. And I've been asked to share a few perspectives from the UCSB and University of California perspective regarding some strategies that we've been using in advancing open access publishing and scholarly communication. Specifically, I will highlight some of our new integrated organizational structures and impact that it had on advancing open access, including advancing scholar-led publishing infrastructures and open access initiatives. But before I dive into it, I just wanted to say that University of California, as you probably all know, we are very deeply committed to open access as a whole. We support open scholarly ecosystem within the UC, but also beyond. support. We support open access through open access transformative agreements with commercial publishers, but we are also deeply committed to Diamond open access publishing initiatives, including Subscribe to Open initiatives and other cooperative funding models that support open infrastructures more globally. At UCSB, open access is really central to our mission. Our vision is grounded in supporting open, equitable, and sustainable publishing ecosystem. We believe that to successfully create a new path towards an open and sustainable publishing, especially for monographs, and also to support bibliodiversity globally, to support the long tail of small independent scholar-led publishers in all fields, not only in STEMs, but also in humanities and social sciences. All of us, librarians, publishers, and also infrastructure providers, we need to work together to support new open access business models, but also open infrastructures. This is why during the past few years, UCSB, we've been heavily involved in supporting community-led open access initiatives, including the Coping Project and also Open Book Collective. We also believe that to support a more sustainable open access publishing more globally, libraries should champion a value-driven publishing ecosystem, an ecosystem where librarians can align their collections development strategy and also open access collection strategy with values that they support, including transparency, equity, inclusivity, and also ethics. So at UCSB, we've been thinking a lot during the past few years how we're going to accomplish that ambitious vision of ours, how we will advance open access in alignment with our mission. And we realized that to do that effectively, we need to create a new organizational structure that will allow us to do that. A structure that will enable our collections librarian to fully integrate open access principles into their role in alignment with value that we support. A few years ago, our collection development and scholarly communication functions were completely separated. Traditional collections were managed by collections development librarians, and open access scholarly communication activities were managed in another silo, also completely separated from general collections development activities. So when our scholarly communication librarian retired a few years ago, we saw an opportunity to fully integrate open access scholarly communication activities within the traditional collections development department. We decided to integrate open access activities into traditional functions of traditional collections development department. We created new roles, open access collection strategists, who now work very collaboratively with other collections development librarians. And under the leadership of our new director of collection strategies, they now collaboratively manage a holistic approach to open access and collections. This structure empowers them to advance collections priorities as a cohesive activities, aligning our collection strategy with our scholarly communication goals in support of that mission and value that we cherish. This is obviously still a lot of work in progress, but the impact of this administrative reorganization has been quite significant up to date. It allows us to put in place a holistic approach to collections, embedding open access with our collections decisions, including budget planning. It has a significant impact on flexibility when it comes to which activities we support and which initiative we engage with. Positioning open access as a core element of our collections development efforts also facilitate the decision-making when it comes to open access activities, whether those are local decisions, UC system-wide decisions, or decisions in collaborations with other consortia. Additionally, this organizational structure fosters staff development by cross-training traditional collections development librarians in both collections, but also in scholarly communication. This strategy creates a skilled, adaptable workforce of the future that is ready to meet the evolving needs of our scholarly community. And finally, with the rising importance of open science, including open data, open software, and various open outputs, our new structures encourage library-wide collaboration across different departments, including research data support, and in that way, we as a library can advance open scholarship in ways that are strategic, sustainable, and aligned with our university's mission and also with the library mission to support open, sustainable, and community-led open access publishing initiatives. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Jill Ciricella. I am the Scholarly Communication Librarian at the CUNY Graduate Center, which is one of 25 campuses across the City University of New York. And I'm here today with really just a small story, a small anecdote, but it's one that I hope will possibly be generalizable or adaptable by those of you who find yourselves in situations with similar constraints. So I'm here to talk a bit about how I was able to convince my library to make the leap from not supporting any purely open access publishers to supporting some. Well, one, to begin with. So the Graduate Center is a fairly small CUNY campus, and our library is also fairly small, but because our community is primarily advanced researchers, the conversation surrounding scholarly publishing is at a fairly high and engaged level. Many of our researchers carry a commitment to scholarship for the public good and care deeply about engaging the broader public with their research. So this probably sounds like a pretty good environment for making budgetary decisions that support and advance nonprofit, community-led open access. And yet, not really. We have a tight budget. And in recent years, the libraries had to sustain cut after cut. And those cuts, of course, cut even deeper when library resources go up in price, which they almost always do. So no matter our mission, no matter our commitments and values, we have very little room in our budget to advance them. Indeed, we can barely look beyond what our researchers consider to be essential subscription resources. In fact, there are already many subscription resources that our researchers do consider to be essential that we can't provide. But then again, our budget is also a powerful tool for expressing and advancing priorities. So how can we meaningfully advance the scholarly communication models we desire if we don't direct some of our budget accordingly? So sure, I'd been speaking to library colleagues about investing in nonprofit, community-led open access initiatives for at least 5 years, but speaking to colleagues is not the same as making a formal proposal, and crafting an airtight argument is not the same as calling a vote, and I had no budget of my own to allocate. But maybe in a way I did. So most of our budget comes from the state, funded by taxes, and it was about that tax levy budget that I kept hearing, that there wasn't enough wiggle room for investing in open, that the time wasn't right given recent cuts, and that it would be hard to justify given all the researchers who need more paid resources. But we also have some soft funds, income from Friends of the Library, some modest donations, etc. And over the past few years, thanks in part to Emily, the library has developed and refined a process wherein any department member can propose expenditures to be drawn from those soft funds. It's a step in the direction of participatory budgeting. A soft funds proposal ensures that the matter goes before the library's executive committee and is voted on. I can't really explain it, but it took me a couple of years to realize that I could submit a soft funds proposal to make the leap from investing nothing in open initiatives to investing something. But once I did realize that, I drew up a proposal starting with Punctum books. Punctum has published numerous CUNY authors, so supporting Punctum was a way of supporting and amplifying CUNY researchers. Also, Punctum's mission aligns really well with CUNY's mission to, quote, educate the children of the whole people, and the Graduate Center's focus on scholarship for the public good. As Punctum says on their website, our authors understand that where they publish is just as important as the content of their work, and that sharing their work with the global commons is vital and necessary. So I knew that my proposal would include Punctum, but was I going to stop there? I was hoping to get us from 0 to a non-zero number, and of course, 1 was the most likely non-zero number. But here's where I got a little crafty, a little strategic. I decided to include more than just Punctum in my proposal, primarily because I wanted to give the executive committee an option beyond, yes, we approve your proposal, and no, we don't approve your proposal. I wanted an outcome in which an incomplete embrace of the proposal would still be a win. So I wasn't initially sure which other nonprofit open publishers I would propose, so I reviewed the possibilities, including their subject areas, their outputs, their price points, and whether or not they worked with a fiscal agent like Lyrasis, which was already an approved vendor. I don't know how true this is for the rest of you, but getting a new vendor approved at CUNY is a long, difficult process, so I wanted to limit my proposal to initiatives we could fund easily through existing vendors. In the end, I proposed investing in both Punctum and Open Library of Humanities, and I tried to make my proposal serve as both a proposal and as a kind of educational document. But the executive committee still had questions and asked to meet with me, which was fine. And among other things, the meeting allowed me to nudge them away from thinking of the payment as a donation, but rather as an investment in the creation of content that's meaningful to CUNY researchers. And the conversation ended somewhere I wasn't expecting, with apparent agreement that the library should at least begin talking about investing in open from, yes, our tax levy budget. But my proposal was about soft funds, and so the vote was about soft funds. And in my little strategy work, the executive committee voted to fund Punctum, but not, at this time, Open Library of Humanities. So we got from 0 to 1. The thin edge of the wedge, the first and hardest increment.
So our speakers will come up and sit at the table. While they're doing that, I'll figure out how we get to the survey answers to look at that. But we also have a microphone person. And are there people who might have questions already for any of our speakers?
Thank you. Hi, Eileen. We've been working together for years. I just wanted to say hi. It's Tom.
Oh my God, hi Tom.
No, that's not the only thing.
I've never seen him in person.
Yeah.
This is outrageous. It's Tom Grady 3D. Somebody help.
That's not the only reason I wanted the mic. A quick question for Jill, actually. You said you did some research into what publishers were out there who you might be able to shortlist. Where did you look, and did you find the resources? Would you have found it easier if they were all in one place?
It would have been great if they were all in one place, but I did spend a lot of time on the Lyrasis page because I knew Lyrasis was an approved CUNY vendor, and so I was looking at the list of open initiatives that they work with and for which they are like the fiscal agent.
Jill, when you say that the executive committee still had questions, what kinds of questions did they have? And maybe you could say a little more about that. It's not a donation thing, because I find that interesting.
Yes. So some of the questions were about if there was an exclusive benefit that we would get, some kind of access like the back file access that comes with Subscribe to Open. And because there isn't exclusive benefits in that way, there was the framing as a donation. But I do think they heard me when I talked about it as an investment where the benefits might not be exclusive, but are still real for our research community. Because it's one of the things that I think is interesting about the born open access, community-led initiatives is the amount of investment doesn't determine how much of their output will be open access or won't be open access, but how much of their content will exist, period. They can do more with more investment. So they can publish more of our community with investment. But I will say, Eileen also said that we could get some free print copies of the books. That would be an exclusive benefit. And that was meaningful in the conversation. It's hard to move away from the model of exclusive benefits in exchange for money.
And I want to go to someone else in the audience, but I want to speak to that really quickly too, that in the Subscribe to Open community, you have this language of incentive, benefit, that you're paying to make open access books happen, but there's also something else that maybe you get. And if you're a born open access press, you can't engage in that discourse. You can't say, I mean, we do say a discount on the print books. That's standard for us, 30%, 40% off, or free books. We really like CUNY a lot. Punctum was founded by a CUNY professor with me, so we have a real special relationship to CUNY. But, how can we, this is probably why we created this session. We have to figure out ways to talk about investing in the production of open access books that doesn't necessarily hinge on the language of financial transactions, even though there are financial transactions. So we can't say those aren't happening, but we have to, I think we need better language, let's just put it that way. And we need to have better language that librarians can present to the people who do authorize the funding. Because funding Punctum Books, for instance, is not a donation. But it is often described that way. And I don't always have an alternative way of talking about it. And I think we have to talk about that more. I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with the word investment, but it depends. But Charles, I don't know if you'll need a microphone, you might.
My name is Charles Watkinson. I'm the director of University of Michigan Press, an AUL for publishing at University of Michigan Library. Why do open book access books matter? So, I think just building on what Eileen said, we've seemed to have been mired in the bureaucracy of transactions, etc., and lost sight of the key reasons why open access books matter in the dialogue that's happening. And what's really encouraging, starting with Emily, is you really picked up on why they matter for democracy, for society, and Eileen's been the clarion voice to say that again and again, and avoiding getting us stuck in the bureaucracy and the boring stuff. But could you just say, could you give us a talking point why open access books matter? I'd really be interested.
Did anybody else watch the Trump video where he says his plans for higher education? Go look at it, right? And you'll see that it's like the transition of higher education from a sector where reading a book and understanding ideas and talking about those ideas collectively was worth funding. It was worth funding because we wanted it. And now we all work in higher, how many of you work at a university where they have cut, you can't major in a humanities discipline anymore? Maybe you're all at wealthy R1s, but like where I live, which has traditionally been in these Division II, Division III schools that are not well resourced, like you can't major in, I worked for a decade at Long Island University, Brooklyn, where you can no longer major in history. You can't major in economics, philosophy, Spanish. You can't, the Clarkson University in upstate New York, they closed the entire School of the Arts and Humanities. And the argument that they made at the time was it doesn't pay for itself. we're just like a business, right? And like any business, if you can't pay for yourself, then we have to get rid of you and bring in someone who can. And so we've gotten stuck on a transactional thing where we imagine that everything has to pay for itself. But like, why? Like, what about a world that we lived in for a very long time, you know, not in my lifetime, but for a long time, where, you know, we just funded the English department because it was mattered to us that people knew how to read. And now we've got a world, and I'm very afraid, you know, that we're going to have a world where if you go to Yale or the University of Michigan, you can read a book, but everybody else is going to get stuck reading spreadsheets. And so, like, what's the value of an open access book? Well, it's the value of the life of the mind. And if we can't, like, if we exclusively talk on the terrain and in the terms of the people who are trying to dismantle us, I'm not sure, like, it just makes it easier for them to completely eliminate us. But I can be a little dramatic.
I would also say the value of open access is public education. And I think we lose sight of that even among open access advocates. Even when I'm hanging out, like even today I was doom scrolling on Twitter, and there were just so many tweets from my community, from community-led open publishing infrastructures for monographs and open book futures, and how they were conducting all these seminars about how are we going to develop the language for the criteria to like justify what we're doing. And I'm not trying to be an asshole, but I just was like, oh my God, you know, can we get back to basics? Open access is about public education. And I think we need to think about it that way more. It's not about credentialing. You know, it's even like, how many times have I been asked to talk to faculty to convince them to publish open access? And I'm always using language like, you'll have more impact, you'll get more citations. Oh my God, I don't care. You know, and I'm a scholar. So, like, we need new ways of talking about this, Charles, I think. I think when you first asked the question, I thought, what is this question? But actually, I think it's a really good question. And we should, because I think what happens is when we get sucked into the institutional black hole with all of its checks and balances and protocols and financial this and financial that, we lose sight of why we're here. We're here to read, to catalog, to make books, to give books, to provide something without barriers, regardless of your income or where you live. So that should be what community-led open access is about.
And I think you need people who believe that, who are also bureaucracy whisperers, you know, which is what I hear from you two, that you're able to make stuff happen.
And also, I think those things are not completely incompatible. In research libraries, we obviously, in R1 or R2, we operate with budgets, and that's economic reality in which we need to operate with. But we also have an obligation to support research that supports the needs of our scholars. So it's the alignment of value. We invest in research that supports the research of our scholarly community. In the same time, opening that research to the global community of researchers at large. So I think it's the questions of alignment of where do we want to invest our dollars to ensure that we support our needs locally, in the same time, in the objective of benefiting the global community and use those resources that we have in best possible way, supporting initiatives that are open, scholar-led, community-led, because I think, the open access with for-profit commercial vendors is there, and it's gonna be there to stay. We like it or we don't like it, we cannot do anything about it. But in the same time, we can also invest our resources and our financial resources and our staff time and all of that into supporting other initiatives that will benefit those communities that are underfunded, scholar-led presses that maybe don't have opportunity to publish with for-profit vendors. And I think it's the question of how do we balance that ecosystem as a whole and how we ensure that there is actually diversity of different publishing models, including different type of open infrastructures that will benefit the scholarly community, publishing community globally, because we don't know that the current APC, BPC models, they might work in some context in the US, let's say University of California, where we were able to open 50% of our research outputs to the community at large, and that's great. That content is out there to the benefit of the global scholarly community. But I think since we are librarians, we have obligation to do more than that and think about other strategies and investing in scholar-led, investing in open infrastructure that will benefit not only those of us here in North America, but also communities in Global South and in different countries. I think that's the question that, from my perspective, is important to work on.
Jill, do you want to say something?
I feel like I'm not as good at soaring, compelling rhetoric, but I'll try to at least be coherent. So I'm also thinking of the Authors Alliance, an organization that I really love. They talk about supporting authors who, quote, write to be read. And I am also infuriated by discourse about quantifying metrics. How many downloads, how many citations, convince us numerically of the impact of your work. But if we go for a broader, more public-minded interpretation of impact, where it's not impact within the scholarly conversation, but impact across the disciplines and across the global publics. I think that, right, yes, open access is essential for that kind of impact, because especially as departments close and as schools have less and less budget to support the scholarly interests of their remaining scholars in these fields, the open access materials will be essential for the sustenance and growth of the disciplines.
Okay, and I see, I think Amy and then Demi. Amy?
Yes, Amy Harris, MIT Press. Emily, if I may, you used the term commons, which had me flashing back to Garrett Hardin and the tragedy of the commons, the notorious. And it's been a while since I thought of that, and thinking about Charles's question. The motivations of building a public commons are absolutely motivations that are in my heart when I work, the work that I do. But I also worry that we're getting to a place where it's hard to talk about that publicly. So, but for those of us who are doing this, where are the places that we need to meet? You talk about the Authors Alliance. We meet here at Charleston. Are the communities at places like DEMAS, the Diamond Open Access, a sort of new community? I feel like because we're coming from disparate places, at libraries, at publishers, at universities, maybe with societies, I absolutely agree that we need to be talking more. And I'm wondering where you would like to be talking about this, even beyond Charleston.
Like me?
Well, for all of the librarians who are up there.
I'll just speak frankly. I've been an academic librarian my whole career. And when I took office as ALA president, I didn't hear from any academic librarians. And the conversations that I did have with academic librarians were, oh, it looks so sad what's happening in school and public libraries. And it is, trust me, really sad what's happening in school and public libraries. But do people know about what's happening at Western Illinois University? Mm-mm. They fired all of their librarians, effective May 2025. No more librarians. You know why? The internet's a portal. We don't need, that problem. So I think we need to be talking about these issues. We need to be connecting the fight for open with the fights for just the existence of a school library, period. We know that what starts in schools ends up in higher ed, right? I'm sorry, I'm going off on a rant, but all of the metrics and assessment work that we're tasked with, that started in K-12 education, and then it took a few years to get to us. So I actually think the conversations we need to be having around power and how to build it to get what we want, those are conversations we need to, I would love to see academic librarians engaging with school librarians about what they're facing. And where can they do that? They can do that at ALA, or they can do that somewhere else. But it's been an interesting day for me to be here because the conversations are among well-resourced people. And so I think very few of us, there's a thin layer of people who will be protected by the number of resources they have. But like what Trump is proposing is if you do any DEI work, they will take your endowment. And so I've never worked for an institution that was brave enough to resist something like that. Maybe I'm just been unlucky, but like that's what we're up against. And so that's like roundabout and not on topic, I know, but like the conversations I would love to see us figure out a way to cross discourses a little bit, because what's been built around open access publishing is like totally impressive, and we need structures like that more than ever, I think.
And I would say to this, and then I want to go to Demi quickly, that one of the things I'm worrying about now relates directly to what Emily's talking about, because my press has built its entire reputation on diversity. Its entire reputation. You know, otherwise we would just be yet another academic press that publishes lots of different kinds of books in different areas of a certain kind of quality, which is wonderful, but our press is so distinguished by specific kinds of content that we're in danger of libraries possibly not being able to fund us or having to withdraw funding because we're too out there with that, right? And this worries me, right? These are things we have to think about. Demi.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sort of almost a depressing comment, I'm afraid, on the basis of what was answered to Charles' question. Is like I've learned the hard way to make a distinction between which arguments work for me, which arguments work for the CFO of the university. I completely get what was answered to Charles. I agree. And if I feel myself depleted of energy to fight for open access, I read an opinion piece by you, I read something from Copenhagen, and then I'm reminded again, this is why I do this. This does not work with most of my colleagues, even in the library, let alone the CFO. Mm-hmm. CFO, of course, I work in a European context. It's really... What works is we should be seen as a university that is very good in open science, that knows what we do, because this is where the European Commission is putting its money. This is how we're going to attract the top scholars. Is we need to be seen as being on top of that game. And just trying to convince the CFO, give some money to me and I'll make sure that the reputation of KU Leuven is they know what they're doing in terms of open access and open science. And that works. They couldn't care less about what I'm actually doing. But it's good for the university, it brings in money, and so I get the money to do my sort of thing. And that is something that I worked, and it's come the hard way of trying to use arguments that I believe in for years that did not go anywhere. And it's just changing the conversation.
I just wanted to follow up about the question of where those conversations should happen and how should we approach that. And I think that there is a lot of conversations that are happening globally in international context. And I think sometimes we tend to focus internally, inversely on US. And it's really challenging because we are a continent and with different type of libraries. But when you look, for example, at Latin American context, I think they've been very successful in building Diamond open access infrastructure, organizing their open access publishing. You know, there is emerging hub in South Africa, in the African context. I was just on conference in spring at the Fiesole retreat in Cape Town in South Africa, where we had this type of conversations happening. When it comes to African context, IFLA conference, there is groups working on that. So there is a lot of conversations happening. And I think we, in US, it is important for all of us to engage in those conversations. And I think the problem that we don't have the same infrastructure. It's very difficult to build, let's say, US hub for something. You know, in Europe, in context of the EU, you have diamas, you have infrastructure that actually supports the creation of, infrastructure where that dialogue can happen. We don't have that in US. So I think we are all a little bit frustrated because of that. But the conversations are happening, and it's up to us to participate in those conversations beyond the US context.
I think this is such a critically important point. And I've brought it up in writing that the US is so balkanized and we just don't collaborate internationally the way we should. And everything Lydia is saying is true. And it's a real problem. I mean, I mentioned to a library director when Scottish University presses announced itself. You know, this is a brand new open access initiative. It's libraries in Scotland at all these universities who have come together to create a press. They just published their first book by Tim Ingold a couple of weeks ago. He's a really well-known anthropologist. And I mentioned to the library director here, who's very progressive, very forward-looking, I said, what if we did that here? What if all these universities got together and said, we're going to create an open access press and we're going to devote our expertise and our skills? And he just looked at me and he said, that is like never going to happen. Although libraries through consortia are doing some of this, I think, like the Big Ten Academic Alliance. I do see some of this happening with consortia. I saw a hand in the back.
Oh, do you mind if I
Oh,
chime in
sorry,
in
Jill,
response
go
to
ahead.
Demi? Sorry.
Jill, go
I
ahead.
just, speaking of being inspired by the things that other people write, I will take this moment to boost an article that Demi wrote. I can't remember the title. It's in UK SG Insights co-authored by Demi Verbeke, and it's about, forgive me if I say this incorrectly, KU Leuven's Fund for Fair Open Access. And it's been so inspirational to me. And I didn't, because I know that it sometimes does not work, to say, look, this school did this, and then I get the response, we don't have that kind of budget. So I did not point out the article when I was meeting with the executive committee, but during the committee meeting, one of the members was searching around, found it, started reading it, and he was the person who said, I think we need to be doing more of this because of that article by Demi. So yes, search for the Fund for Fair Open Access.
And that goes, I want to go to the back again quickly, but that goes to why we also created this session, so that we could start thinking more strategically about sharing resources across libraries, but also publishers, to develop ways of having the kind of conversations Demi is talking about. You have the conversation with your community, and then and Lydia's addressed this too, and then you have ways in which you have to speak to certain constituencies to get the funding you need, and we should be collectively working on how to do that.
So I'm one of the few secondary school folks that attend this conference. It's my third year attending. And the reason I attend every single year is because the majority of the things that we subscribe to at the private level is stuff that you all subscribe to and have been subscribing to for years. And so I'm, meeting with vendors like you all are meeting with. And so scholarly research is really important to a good portion of the students that I help every single day. And access to all of the scholarly research, not just the stuff we have to pay for, would be exceptional. And it's not just important to our students, it's also important to our faculty, because they're creating their classwork. They're finding it online. They don't have the constraints that public schools have in that respect. So they're oftentimes seeking out scholarly things. So having the ability to get open access as well as the other things that are for pay is really, really important in the secondary school world. And I do see the silo. Every time I go to ACRL, when I go, there are some sessions about how, high schools and upper level universities and things can work together, but there's not as many as there used to be. And I really think that conversation should be happening, because we send our kids to your schools, all of them, and they're expecting to see the resources that they had at their school. And there's some kids that come back to us and say the libraries that they go to and some of the schools that they're going to are not nearly as well funded and not nearly as well sourced as ours. And I don't even think we're not even that big. I mean, we're like 9 people that work in that building, and I think this is definitely the thing, and this is absolutely the moment that we all should be having these discussions because of what has just transpired in our election. We can't just not keep having this conversation. So I'm just saying I'm all with y'all, and I want to keep. And if I could figure out a way to invest, like we're a Lyricist member too. I'm not sure they have an avenue for secondary schools to invest.
I bet they do.
Many of them, some of the things I try to get through Lyricists are like, no, we don't have pricing for you. And so I have to remind them every single time that we are part of this just like all the others. So that's just my thing. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments.